Adventures of the Decepticons Pet Ghost by Played Crowd 5610. Part 3 of Hunting the Nemesis. Chapter 15, Operation Payback. Summary: Danny and Knockout team up to get some payback. Danny shoved his hands in his pockets as he walked down the hall of the Nemesis on the way to the Med Bay. It's been a couple of days since the event with Breakdown and Mac, and Danny had taken every available opportunity to visit the Blue Con. That is, at least, when Knockout hadn't decided to put a ban on visitors and put his husband in power down to get more rest and heal. The door to the Med Bay slid open easily for him. He stood in the entryway and glanced around the room. On the medical table, Breakdown was deep in recharge. Danny looked up at the readings on the monitor to make sure he was stable before glancing around the rest of the room. Knockout wasn't here. Knockout? He yelled, not wanting to wake Breakdown, but there was no response. Danny frowned. It wasn't like Knockout to leave Breakdown unattended, not with how he'd been acting since the injury. He had been constantly checking readings, tweaking equipment, doing anything he could to keep his processes busy. Danny tapped his foot on the ground as he was thinking. Breakdown was asleep, so Danny couldn't really hang out with him anymore. And right now Danny was more concerned as to where Knockout could be and what was so much more important than Breakdown. He sighed deeply before turning on his heel out the door. Time to find himself a Decepticon medic. It didn't take too much searching to locate the red sports car. Then he found him in a research hub type room with a small desk and large monitor just a few doors down from the Med Bay. It seems the con still wanted to be close to Breakdown after all. The Knockout hunched over one of the terminals, had his optics fixed on the screen, completely engrossed in whatever he was doing. Danny stepped forward curiously about what had captured the mech's attention. "What are you doing?" Knockout's surface twitched, but he didn't jump. "Must you always sneak up on me like that?" he muttered, his tone sharp. His optics flickered briefly down to Danny before he returned his gaze to the screen. Then he tilted his head, stepping beside Knockout to get a better look at what was on the terminal. "What's this?" Knockout sighed heavily, leaning back slightly as his field pulsed with a mix of frustration and something darker. "I've been working on tracking down the human scientist responsible for Breakdown's condition." His voice was laced with bitterness, and he gestured towards the screen. "I think I've found something. A warehouse they may be hiding in." She gestured vaguely towards the screen. Then he crossed his arms, not liking where this was going one bit. Knockout wanted revenge, and he was going to get himself hurt in the process. "And what, you're just going to go down there alone?" Knockout's optics narrowed. "Of course I'm going down there," he growled, his EM field flared with pure hatred. "They took him apart. They nearly killed him. I won't rest until they're nothing but scrap." Danny's field mimicked the sentiment, but he needed to keep a level head here. Someone had to. Knockout, you're not going to get yourself killed. If they can take down Breakdown, they can take you down too. Knockout's engine growled in irritation. "I'm not Breakdown. I'm faster, smaller, more precise. I know how to fight them now. They ambushed Breakdown when he was hurt. If they had fought him head on, they would have lost. I wouldn't make the same mistakes." He glared at Danny as if he was the source of his problems. "And I'm not staying here while those humans walk away unpunished." Then he let out a long sigh, shaking his head. "All right then." Then he stretched his arms over his head. "I guess I'm going with you." Knockout blinked, his optics flickering with confusion. "What? No, you're not. You will get yourself killed down there, human." Danny shrugged, his voice calm but firm. "If you're going, I'm going. I'm not going to let you get yourself torn apart. Besides, what good are you to Breakdown if you end up dissected in some lab, too? Knockout scoffed, his tone bitter. And what makes you think you'd be any help? You're fragile. Danny sighed. If I'm there, I can make sure you don't get yourself killed. Plus, he added, I'd hate to be the one to tell Breakdown that his husband died trying to defend his honor. He looked up at the medic with a raised eyebrow. Knockout said nothing, just glared, but Danny could sense the conflict in him. And maybe, Danny continued, I want to get some payback too. Knockout's optics softened slightly. You are either very brave or very foolish. Danny grinned. Probably both. Danny and Knockout stepped through the ground bridge. The swirling green portal spit them out at the edge of a dense forest, the trees surrounding them casting shadows as the sun began to set, leaving the air cool and damp. Ahead, just visible through the tree line, was a massive grey structure that looked to be some kind of old military base. Obviously, the place they were looking for. Knockout took a step forward, his bright red frame standing out against the greenery. His optics narrowed as he surveyed the scene. Then he could feel the aggression flowing off of him in waves. Then he bit his lip and looked up at the Buster Happy Con. All right, Danny said, clapping his hands together. We need to do this with minimum casualties. Knockout scoffed, crossing his arms over his chest plates. Minimum casualties? What was the point of coming here then, if not to destroy them? He asked, incredulously, his voice filled with venom. I'm not just going to not hunt them because you care about their lives. Not after what they did. Then he sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. He had expected this reaction. Look, as much as I'd love to see them all gone, I need you to trust me. If we kill a bunch of them, it will only make things worse. How exactly? Knockout snapped, his frustration growing. Those organizations, ones like Mac. Then he gestured vaguely towards the warehouse. They get funded and supported by showing their benefactors that there is a threat they need to handle. You kill their soldiers, and they will have all the proof they need to go to their backers, show the damage and say, look, this is why we need more weapons, more experiments, more funding. I've dealt with groups like this before. Then he sighed, before continuing. I've learned that the more attention you give them, the more justification they have for their horrible work. We need to take them out without creating a mess that makes them look like the victims. Knockout's engine rumbled angrily. So what? You just let them get away with torturing Breakdown? His field buzzed with indignation. No, not exactly. Then he replied, what we do instead is this. Then he held up a USB stick for the mech to use. We upload a virus into the systems. One my friend and I designed years back. It will destroy everything they've got on Breakdown, wipe all their data, and crash their networks. It will also let us track their other bases, so we can go after them again if we need to. That way, we dismantle them from the inside out. And here I thought I could at least enjoy disassembling a few of them, Knockout grumbled. Danny hummed, thoughtfully, before smiling slightly. Dismemberment's still on the table, but they have to survive it. Knockout let out a sound that was somewhere between a laugh and a groan. You're impossible. Then he grinned. Just practical. He paused, before giving Knockout a serious look. I will be the distraction. Take out a few guards quietly and get us into the building. You stay here, and once I signal you, you come in, make a second distraction. I will handle the tech. Knockout grumbled, but didn't argue. He could tell Danny had thought this through, and as much as he hated to admit it, there was logic in what the human was saying. Fine. Knockout relented, his tone dripping with reluctance. But if you die down there, I won't feel bad. Danny chuckled. Sure. He placed the phantom earpiece into his ear and connected it to the direct comm line through his phone to Knockout's comm. Luckily, After some modifications, he made the large, chunky, bright green thing much more discreet than his parents' design. When Danny transformed into his human form, in a flash of bright light, Knockout had seen it before. Back when they'd gone racing together, the transformation still intrigued the mech. But now wasn't the time for curiosity. "All right," Danny said, taking a deep breath. "I'll make sure to be quick. You just make sure you're ready to do your part when I need you." Knockout nodded, but his focus was already on the warehouse, his optics tracking the human guards, watching their movements and patterns. His field buzzed with tension and hatred. He wanted nothing more than to charge in and start tearing things apart. But he waited, trusting, for now, that Danny's plan would work. Then he slipped through the shadows, careful to keep out of sight as he navigated the perimeter of the base. His heartbeat thrummed in his ears, but his movements were swift and deliberate. Just ahead, another guard stood by himself, seemingly focused on a comm unit. Then he crept closer, his feet barely making a sound on the gravel, and faced his hand through the back of the guard's head, his fingers tingling as he used a little trick he didn't often employ, sending a light electricity pulse through the guard's neural system. The man crumbled to the ground, unconscious but unharmed. Then he stepped over the limp body and continued forward, repeating the action with every other guard he came across. Once he had knocked out the patrolling guards, he didn't have much time left before someone would notice. He approached the rear entrance to the warehouse. The door was locked, but it didn't do much against a half-ghost like him. He faced his hand into the keypad, the lock mechanism sparkling momentarily before the door swung open with an eerie creak. Then he stepped inside, immediately noticing the clipboard on the nearby desk. He snatched it up, tucking it under his arm and walking in with casual confidence as if he belonged there. The interior of the warehouse buzzed with activity, techs working on various machines, computers beeping, and soldiers moving crates of equipment. Then he rounded a corner, his breath catching as he spotted a man standing tall at the center of the room, overseeing the operation. White hair, no mask, smug expression. He didn't need an introduction. Breakdown spoke enough about the pain caused by this human for Danny to know immediately. Silus. The sight of him made Danny's skin crawl. He clenched his jaw, biting back a snarl that threatened to escape. Danny's mind flashed back to others like Silus, men who thought they could do whatever they wanted to people with no repercussions. The room quieted as several operatives spotted him simultaneously. Multiple guns raised, with clicks of the safety being turned off, barrels trained on his chest. Then he raised his hands in mock surrender, his voice smooth and nonchalant. Hey, guys, what's the problem? I'm just here about the new weapon shipment." The guard seemed slightly confused. "We weren't expecting a shipment," one of them called out. "I'm with Fanfic. We were looking for a new business opportunity, so I was told to come in here and bring you some of the newer models. Don't shoot me. I'm just a delivery boy." Danny shrugged. The clipboard is still in his raised hand. Some lowered the gun slightly. Confusion replacing hostility for just a moment. Silus, though, was not so easily swayed. He stepped forward, his icy gaze locking onto Danny. Then he felt the urge to glare back, with all the hatred he was feeling, but he knew he couldn't. "Fanfic?" Silus asked, his voice sharp. "As in the ghost hunting equipment?" Danny froze for half a second, but quickly recovered, forcing a cocky grin on his face. "The one and only. Our gear doesn't just work on ghosts. It works on robots, too. Figured an organization like yours would be interested. We've got a pretty solid track record with the guys in white if you need references." Silus stepped closer, each step deliberate and predatory. Then he fought to keep the false confidence in his stance as Silus moved into his personal space, close enough that Danny could feel the man's breath. Silus' smirk was razor sharp. Is that so? Silus muttered, his tone dripping with sarcasm. And he tilted his head, trying to keep it light. Yeah, I mean, hey, it'd be a shame not to use our equipment for something a little more exciting, right? For a tense moment, then he thought Silus might actually buy it. Then, with a dismissive wave of his hand, Silus turned to his men. Let him get out of here. The undertone was clear. Kill him. Danny's muscles tensed as one of the guards moved in to grab him. Without missing a beat, he twisted, snatched the gun from the man's holster. In a fluent motion, he faced through the guard's grip and fired a shot into the man's knee. The soldier crumbled with a shout, and Danny was already moving, firing 2 more shots into legs of the guards nearest him. The room exploded into chaos. Silus drove behind a wall, pulling out his own gun, while the other operatives scrambled, shooting commands as they trained their weapons on Danny. Bullets whistled past, and Danny ducked behind a large piece of machinery, using it as a cover. All right, Danny muttered into the calm, dodging another hail of bullets. Officially distracted. You're up, paint job. Come in swinging. It didn't take long before the Decepticon barreled through the man's hangar door, sending it flying off its hinges before the agents even registered his presence. Doctor in the house! Knockout quipped, his voice dripping with amusement as he surveyed the chaos. Danny ground, face-planting as he ducked to avoid another spray of bullets. Really? He hissed into the calm. Still, Knockout was the perfect distraction. Now, in full panic, the operative shifted their focus to the towering mech, firing useless at him with regular bullets. They bounced off Knockout's armor, only leaving a few minor scratches. Danny winced, knowing full well Knockout would complain about that later. With the agents fully distracted, Danny took his chance. He sprinted towards a nearby computer terminal. Waving between the chaos, he jammed the USB stick into the pod and started typing rapidly, the virus already loading into the mech's system. But before he could finish, searing pain shot through his hand. A knife had pinned his hand to the keyboard. Then he hissed in pain, looking up to see Silus standing above him, a smirk on his face. I'm not stupid, kid, Silus said, voice low and dangerous. I know a distraction when I see one. Then he chuckled, though it came out more like a growl. And here I thought... Save it, Silus interrupted, stepping closer, his presence menacing. I'm going to enjoy this. First, we will dismantle your friend over there, piece by piece. You will get a front row seat. Then, once we're done with him, you will be next. Danny's eyes narrowed, core seething in anger, not for himself, but at the thought of them hurting Knockout. You scientists are all the same. Evil freaks, torturing innocent people just because you can. His voice dripped with disgust. You'd kill a newborn if it gave you scientific readings. Before Silus could respond, Danny spat in his face, his disgust clear. Silus whipped it off, a dark chuckle escaping his lips. Before he could say anything more, Danny faced his hand through the knife, ignoring the pain, as he grabbed the blade by the handle, pulling it out of the terminal. In an instant, Danny lunged at Silus, tackling him to the ground. He pinned the man beneath him, with the knife at his neck. You're going to pay for what you did to break down. Danny snarled, his voice low and dangerous. Silus, ever the psychopath, smirked, his voice calm despite the situation. It was fun, you know, experimenting on him, seeing how far I could push. Danny's eyes blazed with green energy, his fury rising. The urge to lash out was overwhelming. He had told Knockout no killing, and now he was getting close to breaking his own rule. Silus focused on Danny's face, more specifically, Danny's eyes. You're a little scientific marvel yourself, aren't you, kid? The man chuckled. I'd love to find out what makes you tick. Then he narrowed his eyes, trying to ignore the comment, but then his gaze shifted to Silus' right eye. You know what they say, Silus. Danny's voice was almost calm, cold, as he tilted his head slightly. An eye for an eye, right? Silus' eyes widened, realization dawning just a moment too late, pain flashing across his face as Danny's hand faced into his skull. There was no hesitation. With a swift motion, Danny pulled out Silus' right eye, the same eye that had been taken from Breakdown. Silus yelled in pain. His hands flew up to desperately clutch at his now empty socket, slick with his own blood. Danny stood, looming above him. If you ever hurt someone I care about again, Danny growled, voice crackling with energy, I will come back, and next time I will drag you to hell myself. Am I clear? He turned away, leaving Silus on the floor. Danny's bleeding hand still gripped the knife. He had more work to do. He sprinted back to the panel, checking the status of the virus. It was done. The screens flickered, and the data was rapidly disappearing from the mech system. Just as planned, Danny yanked the USB stick out and slipped it into his pocket. The mission was a success. But as he turned around, his gaze landed on Knockout, and Danny's stomach crunched. Knockout's servers were smeared with an unsettling amount of blood. More than Danny had expected. He grimaced, his eyes shifting down to his own hands, stained with gory red from both the stab wound and where he tore Silus' eye out. I guess that's what you should expect when you bring a Decepticon to a human fight. Then he stepped over several unconscious, or at least he hoped they were unconscious, mech agents scattered across the floor. Most of them sporting burned injuries from Knockout's electric port. Knockout! He called up to the towering mech standing amidst the carnage, his optics still gleaming with a dangerous energy. Knockout's optics snapped to Danny. He looked almost ready to attack him, but quickly pulled back when he recognized him. As their eyes met, the wiring of Knockout's buster slowed to a stop. "We're all good," Danny said, motioning for him to stop. "Let's get out of here." Knockout hesitated, his optics scanning the room as if debating whether or not to finish off the remaining agents. But after a beat, he nodded begrudgingly. Without a word, he scooped Danny up, carried him across the room with ease. Danny noticed the way Knockout stepped over the bodies without a second thought. When they made it outside of the warehouse through the giant hole Knockout had busted through, the Decepticon quickly transformed, and Danny was dropped into the passenger seat as Knockout's engine roared to life. Tires screeched, and they took off down the road. Knockout remained silent for the drive, and Danny stared at the blood staining his hands. He clenched them into fists, not sure what to feel: satisfaction, guilt, or something else entirely. Knockout and Danny sped through the ground bridge, screeching to a stop inside the Nemesis. Then he stepped out of the vehicle and onto the purple flooring. Knockout transformed back into his robot model, and his optics quickly zeroed in on Danny's injuries. His hand was still bleeding from where Silus had stabbed it. "You've been shot," Knockout stated as he gently scooped Danny up to inspect him closer. Danny winced, looking down at his shoulder, and saw a bullet hole through his shirt that he hadn't noticed before. I guess I didn't feel that one." Knockout's grip tightened as they made their way to the med bay. Then he tried to ignore the fact that he was currently sitting in blood-stained service. The doors to the med bay slid open, and Breakdown stirred from his recharge, sitting up on the medical berth. His lone optic flickered groggily as he took in the sight of Danny and Knockout, both bloodied and battered. "What in the pit happened?" Breakdown asked, his voice thick with confusion and concern. "We went to visit the people who did that to you," Danny said, offering a very smile. "Nice company." Knockout smirked, his tone dark as he added, "Their screams were delicious." Danny grimaced, but Breakdown's reaction was immediate. His optics widened in alarm, and he looked between Knockout and Danny, very written across his face. You could have been hurt, he snapped at Knockout. Knockout, at the very least, had the nerves to look castrated. It was fine. It was worth it, he said. Knockout placed Danny down on a nearby bench, turning his attention to the human's wounds. His eyes hovered over the injuries for a moment before he sighed and went to one of his shelves. He pulled out a medical kit, the same one left behind after Starscream had brought a human nurse on board, and handed it to Danny. "Since you always insist on doing these things yourself," Knockout muttered, passing the kit to Danny. Danny nodded, taking the kit without hesitation. "Thanks," he set to work, patching up his hand and shoulder. Once he finished wrapping the bandages around his hand, then he turned to Breakdown with a grin. "All right, got a gift for you." Breakdown tilted his helmet, confused, as Danny pulled something from his pocket. He held it up, and Knockout's optics narrowed when he saw it. "From Silus," Danny said. "He sends his love." Breakdown stared at his dismembered eye in stunned silence for a moment, then uttered a huff of surprised laughter. "Well, ain't that something? Didn't expect a souvenir." Despite the grimness of the situation, there was a flicker of approval in his expression. Knockout glanced between the two of them, his EM field still humming with the adrenaline from their mission. "And if it's any consolation, I don't think Silus will be bothering us again anytime soon," he said, a wicked gleam in his optics. Then he leaned back, finally letting the exhaustion seep into his body. "Good. He deserved a lot worse for what he did to you." He glanced at Breakdown, his expression softening. "I just thought you should have something of his, to know we didn't let him get away with it." Breakdown's optics met Danny's with a mixture of gratitude and something deeper crossing his face. "Thanks, kid. I appreciate it."